So, Matt, I've got a confession to make. Last time we recorded, we were talking about AI, but when we finished, we weren't sure whether or not to post it because AI is such a big thing, and we didn't reach, a ton of conclusions. It's not like the usual time we talk where
Yeah, that's
you're
right.
sort of unloading your wisdom on us. But when we decided we were going to put it out, we decided to just publish the video with the transcript. And I said to you, I think, yeah, that's great, but I'm going to have to do quite a lot of work on the transcript because if you've ever seen a transcript, it's about shifting the default behaviors. And I think,
Yeah,
last time we were talking about how, if you're just starting out, or maybe now you're 10 years old, and you're going to grow up an AI native in the way that my son grew up a digital native.
yeah.
But for the rest of us who are older or for businesses, one of the key questions we need to ask ourselves when we're doing any job, particularly if it's a sort of a bit of essentially busy work like that was how should I use AI? How can I use AI to get this done quicker and move on with the stuff
Oh
that
man,
AI can't do? Does that ring any bells for you? Does
I
that
think
resonate with you?
yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. Do you know what? It's such an interesting point. So funny enough, yesterday or the day before, I was running through what I'm trying to do at the moment is pull together a list of use cases or like how might you use AI to accelerate your daily work life and stuff like that. And so I was spending a lot of time Googling and going on YouTube and saying, like give me some use cases for thingy. And you know what? There is just so much noise.
Yeah.
Like on YouTube, there is so much. I'm trying to find who are the most influential people, what are they saying about how to use AI? And then there's this whole mix between how to use tools like Claude and ChatGPT versus
Yeah.
how to use AI tools and, like if you want to use workflow automation and stuff like that.
Mm.
And by the end of it, my brain was just like, what the hell? And where I've come down on this, okay, in terms of learning, where I've come down on this is I'm going to follow the Duolingo approach, and I'm just going to say AI first,
Yeah.
right? And so my approach at the moment, and I was doing this today. I'll explain what I did earlier, but I did it after I did this like yesterday afternoon. I did an AI first approach, and then I was just like, everything I want to do, I'm going to try doing with AI first. And if it doesn't improve the situation, I will stop doing it. And if it does improve the situation, then jobs are good. And
Yeah.
so yesterday I had a task list. I had like three or four tasks to do. One of the tasks was I needed to produce some copy for a welcome screen for a questionnaire survey thing that I was doing, and then the thank you screen for that thing. So I basically used ChatGPT, who I've named Wilson. And so what I've done is I've asked Wilson to, I gave him the context, said what I was trying to do, and I got him to produce the copy for me, got that added into the system, and then what I could do is review that and move it forward. So I did that. I also needed to create some content for a web page talking about AI skills and how we're using AI, what skills and capabilities are. So I did that. I then thought, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it to look on the web to find out what the other web pages are like, and then I'll get it to not just create the copy for me, but I'll get it to create the website for me also.
Ah.
And that wasn't anywhere near as successful. Clearly, there is some work they need to do there. And what's interesting is finding the right tool for doing that. So
Mhm.
when I've done web stuff before, I've used Vercel's V0 tool to create web pages. This was just straight in ChatGPT.
Yeah. So you were literally
So
asking it
what
to
I've been trying to
build
do,
you the HTML, were you?
yeah. So I just said, look, go on. This is the website. This is our website currently. I would like you to take a look at the landing pages on this site, and I'd like you to create a landing page and use the content that you've just created about AI and create me a landing page. And it wasn't even a close approximation to what those pages looked like. Wasn't great at all.
So I,
But that's good because
yeah,
I'm understanding the limits,
yeah, I
right?
think this is really interesting because what we're talking about here is how are we pushing AI into the workflow, and that does mean you need to be on the edge of it. One thing I'm going to make a prediction that even though AI yesterday didn't do what you needed to do, right up to the point where it failed, it was very confident that it could do what you needed it to do.
Yeah.
Because that's my experience. My experience when you're pushing towards the limits is that it will say, "Yeah, no problem, I can do that," and then you
Yeah.
can sit there for half an hour because it's not really,
Yeah.
it can't really cope yet. And sometimes it's to do with context length. That's the thing I bump into most
Yeah.
often. If you're listening and you're not sure what the context length is, it's effectively how much data the LLM can process before it answers your query. So, in my case, for example, I might feed it a ton of links and say, "Let's analyze these web pages." And sometimes it's just too much context, and it really sort of bumps into the limits. But I kind of like its unbridled enthusiasm and confidence up to a point,
Yeah.
and then I say, "Yeah." Then I tell it to get its act together. Have you done the thing yet? This is slightly an aside, but the ChatGPT, OpenAI have just increased the memory. The LLM's ability to
Yeah.
remember all your conversations. Have you had that thing on your phone yet, where it says, "If you want, I'll describe you," so you can see? Have you had that?
Oh, I saw somebody had done it on LinkedIn, and then I then decided to put the prompt in for myself to see what it did, and I was shocked. Well, the thing is, I can't help but feel like those things to me seem a lot like reading your horoscope. Do you know what I mean?
What they could apply to anyone.
Yeah, and you do because you don't see anyone else. Well, I mean, actually, that's a lie. You see everyone else's because they post it up on every social media platform that they got available to. But what did you think? Did you do that?
I didn't post it, but yeah, it gave me the actual prompt in the app, more or less, and said,
Really?
if you want to know what I think of you, essentially, isn't it? I mean, and
Yeah.
it was complimentary as you'd expect. But then what I did, which was much more interesting, was say, "Okay, well, that's very kind, but what are the things that I should work on based on
Right. Okay.
your experience of me over the past, I don't know how long it's been, a year or whatever." And that I thought was much more useful, because we all like being
Yeah.
told what we're good at. And if you get to our sort of point, I guess, I'm pretty confident in what I'm good at. What I want to know is the areas where I can improve. So that's more or less how I framed the question back to it.
Yeah. I mean, but that's interesting though, isn't it? It's like when you're saying earlier about confidence.
Mm.
Like AI is so confident that it can do something up to the point that it can't. That it's
Yeah.
actually you have to be really on your toes. Like there's an example of this this morning. I was using Copilot in Visual Studio Code to create a web interface for me,
Mm.
and I told it what I wanted. It decided because I use Python that it wanted to use Flask, which is like a web-based framework for that. And it gave me instructions, but it told me the instructions to run that application is Python and then the application name, which is how you run a Python script. But it's not how you run a Flask app. The way you run a Flask app is you do Flask space run, and then that will initialize the web server and it will initialize the website. But it told me Python space file name 3 or 4 times
Did it?
in its explanation as to how I should run and execute this app. And in the end, I turned around to it and said, "You don't execute a Python file this way, you do this." And then it said, "Oh, you're right." And then what it decided to do was update the readme.file to include that piece of information in. But the point is, it's so confident
Yeah.
that the information it gave me that unless you are on top of your game, unless you understand the limitations, you understand the hallucinations, you understand that it can put incorrect things in, your ability to use AI to genuinely accelerate yourself is limited. It is only up to the limit of your knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if you didn't know that way of executing it isn't right, then you wouldn't know to question it, would you?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've had that a lot in the past,
Mm.
especially with coding queries. I've had that a lot in the past where it's told me certain things which just aren't true. And
Yeah.
it's only been through executing evaluation and testing that I've known that what it's given me is false. And I imagine I mean, I don't know whether that's as true with content production.
Obviously, creating text is what it's really good at the moment. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the basis of everything. But I've definitely seen the same. Spinning up a Hugo site, and we did some PHP, we did some stuff in the terminal. Stuff that I wouldn't normally do.
Yeah.
Python as well, and there's definitely been two or three times where I've said, "This is what I want," and because I don't know what it's giving me back isn't right or isn't going to work, you can easily lose half an hour or more, sort of going down a rabbit hole. At the end of which we go, "Yeah, okay."
Yeah.
I mean, I've lost the will to live.
But
I mean,
but
ChatGPT,
that's
which is obviously the
but
one I know, will keep saying it's got a
yeah.
solution to the end of time. I think, even if
Yeah.
it actually doesn't.
You know, you know what though? What's crazy that you just said there you can go down a rabbit hole for half an hour,
Mm.
right? And you think, Christ, that's a waste of time. But then what you realize is actually, you know what? You've saved yourself a week's worth of work to get to where you are. So half an hour against, 37 and a half hours is not a lot of time to waste to learn something about the limitations of the tools you're using, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. As
I,
long
I'm,
as you've
I'm not
got enough.
suggesting that you're saying that, but
Yeah,
sorry, go on.
no, I think that's true. As long as by the end of that half an hour you've got somewhere, and I've definitely had a couple of occasions where actually at the end of it, was it one of them we were mucking around with a template, a Hugo template, because of course being me, I wanted it to be slightly different from the way the designer had designed it, and it got to the stage where we changed so many of the files, just me saying, no, I want this, no, I want this, that actually somewhere along the line, and this would have been what, a month or more ago, that it was actually easier to start again because it was so wrong. Because ChatGPT would go, oh, I know what it is. We just need to update this file here and this file here and this file here. Oh, that hasn't worked. This
Yeah,
file here, this file, and in the end, it just got to the point where actually it's easy to start with a clean installation and go again.
yeah. And that's fascinating in itself. I can talk about this with certain confidence because I've obviously got a lot of experience with software development in the background. But see, this is where, from a development point of view, actually, like AI can be an accelerator, but it can only be an accelerator within the context of good practice. So, for
Mhm.
example, if ChatGPT was changing your code that much, then it would be better to have also been using Git
Yeah,
locally, for
yeah,
example, so that actually you could roll back the
yeah,
change. Because trying to tell ChatGTP to undo those changes is actually really hard
yeah,
because it doesn't, in my experience, it doesn't seem to have enough context of the changes that it's making to your code to know how to roll everything back. Whereas actually, you can then go back into the terminal and you can roll back the Git submissions that you've done. So, for a lot of people that are not used to coding, don't have that best practice mindset from
yeah,
from having learnt that over the years,
yeah,
they don't
yeah.
know the best way to make their lives easier in that regard. I think there's this genuine, really interesting conversation that's going on at the moment about the idea of experienced people versus new people versus that sort of job loss and trajectory and what happens, all that sort of stuff. And that you see there's so many peripheral tasks of being a software developer or being a writer or
Hmm.
being a user experience person, whatever it is, whatever your role is, there are so many peripheral tasks that are not covered in that sort of in what AI is doing at the
Yeah,
moment
yeah,
that actually makes it difficult for those people to be replaced
yeah. Wholesale. Yeah,
holistically,
yeah,
if you know what I mean.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think. Well, to your point, the second time I did that particular project, we did do it in Git because one of the most important things, I talked about how critical it is to default to AI. I think at this stage, if we want to learn, if we want to
Yeah.
push, we've got to default to it. But one of the other really important things is to constantly be asking when there's an issue, how could I make this clearer? How could I do this better? How could I avoid this particular problem happening again? And, to your point, when I redid the Hugo site for the second time, we did do it through Git because I had asked those questions. And it's that same thing we've talked about
Right.
before. It's, what we're all trying to do, I hope we're all trying to do, is build an efficient process. And one of the ways you do that is by effectively having a list, writing it down, and then making changes, improving it every time you run into
Yeah.
something to speed up. And then, of course, eventually it becomes second nature. But yeah, I think that's really important. And one of the other things I just want to tell you this as it's happened this week is that what I've got into the habit of this week is talking to ChatGPT. Now, you mentioned earlier on that
Mhm.
you'd named ChatGPT Wilson, and I think I can't remember whether we talked about this online or not, but the massive change I think is going to be when we have our kind of our proper personal AI that knows us and knows all
Systems,
about
yeah.
us and all of that kind of stuff. But one of the things I've done in the past week is just be more aggressive about hitting the dictation button on the Mac. So I'm actually,
Really?
yeah, because I've found that I was doing a lot
Oh,
of
so when you
prompt.
say talking to it, you mean actually talking to it,
Well,
the speech to text?
yeah. So you can do that. I mean, I'm talking about ChatGPT because I use that most. So I'm just tapping my button, then saying what I want, hitting enter, and it's just again, it's one of those things I think about the process is how are we smoothing because often the prompts that we're
Yeah.
writing they're not programmatic prompts. They're more of a casual kind of thing. I don't want this, I want that. Oh, and then we're letting the AI do the
Yeah.
work of passing what you've said and coming up with a solution. And I think I found that I was spending a lot of time typing, a lot of time typing prompts where actually it's pretty easy to go click, click, say what you want, hit enter,
Yeah.
and it's just one of those things. I think if you happen to be listening to this and you happen to be working in an environment where you can talk out loud, we're all going to be talking to our computers soon and expecting them to understand and do the things we want them to do. And I think again, getting into that mindset
That's
is
so,
really important.
yeah, that's so interesting because I remember a little while ago, maybe 2, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I think the Microsoft had released that sort of 3D modeling thing for their Xbox. No, it must have been longer than that, I suppose. I can't remember how long ago. Anyway, long time ago. But the idea was that gestural interfaces and natural language,
Mhm.
that was going to be the shift in input behavior. So there's this theory in user experience that significant changes to user experience it comes about because of changes of input modality.
Yeah,
So, for example, like using a mouse to have a graphical user interface that completely revolutionized computing.
yeah,
There's a long, long time people have been talking about voice, and the reason voice hasn't worked is because, first of all, computers have been shit at parsing voice to text. That's always been very bad. It's not bad any longer. But then the other trouble is environments. Now,
yeah.
can you imagine being sat in an office where everybody is sat down talking to their computers all the time? You know what I
Well,
mean? Like,
yeah,
have you been on a meeting? Have you been in a meeting where like several people around you are in meetings at the same time? And, you know,
yeah,
like noise suppression isn't brilliant always. You're getting bleed over from other conversations. That's a real challenge
for sure.
for
Yeah,
enterprises, I would
yeah.
say. But that's not to say that actually what's interesting about what you said is that for people that can do it, now actually, I hadn't even thought about this for a long while, but now actually, that whole promise of natural language processing, language, vocal input into your computer systems is actually genuinely achievable right now, isn't it?
I was really excited about dictation about 15 years ago. And then again, when I was writing
Yeah.
the novels, I was really excited about it. But it never worked for me because the detection wasn't good enough, which means you were constantly having to go back and change. And I'm a pretty quick typist, so it was just easier to type. The difference with this, of
Yeah.
course, is that the detection's gotten a lot better. It's much more accurate with what
Yeah.
you're saying. But second of all, what we're saying into the thing, it's not the final goal. What we're then relying on is the LLM to look at that, do its work,
And
which
then
it's
create the
very good
output.
at, and
Yeah.
then yeah, define what it thinks your intention is, and then go away and do that. And I just think, yeah, while you're right that it could be an issue for lots of offices, I've also worked with clients where they were massive open plan offices and everyone was on the phone. So I don't think it's going to be that much of an issue. And I think we're just sort of inevitably going to do that. You're going to be, shouting at your computer from one side of the room saying, while I put the kettle on, do this.
And you can see how plausible that is, because you, like, for example, when I'm at home, we have an Apple TV and we've got some little Apple speakers, the small
Yeah.
ones. I've forgotten what they brand them as now.
HomePods.
But it can recognize the difference between, yeah, it can recognize the difference between me and my wife's voice. It shows a little icon up in the top right hand corner that tells you who asked it, the thing, and that type of detection is pretty good now.
Mm.
And it can tell the difference between my daughter and my wife, which is, I mean, both female voices, but it knows the difference, which
Yeah.
is interesting. I mean, this is why I think AI is so hard at the moment, in terms of, not understanding what you can do, how you should do something. Because it was the same with remote work, it was the same with the website. The point is that everyone knows that they've got these possibilities available to them. You can use AI to make your life easier, but at the moment it's very difficult to know how.
Yeah.
And so having concrete examples like that, how you use voice in order to have conversations to get the desired outcome that you want, how like an example today, I'm writing a case study for a client. We have a consistent format, and what I've done is I've asked ChatGPT to interview me and to ask me questions in that format, so it
Yeah.
can then write the case study for me.
Perfect.
Because I don't need to write it at all. It needs to get the information out of my head in a way that it can use it to deliver the work that it needs to deliver.
Yeah.
And so I'm really trying to do things like that to accelerate the way I
Yeah.
work. And it's absolutely fascinating.
I agree. I think it's using it. We ended the last episode by saying people should get out there and use it, and hopefully this one will just give you another little nudge in that direction and try and
Yeah.
make it your default.
I
Try and
think
push a little bit on the jobs that you're needing to do. How can I use AI? And then, yeah, if you're sitting on your own, try talking to your
I,
computer.
I think we said this before, but it's worth knowing when you're thinking about how to use AI first. I don't know whether this is your experience, Nick, but it's certainly my experience. The way I think about it is, imagine that I've got an eager assistant wanting to work for me.
Yeah,
So how would I explain to
yeah,
it the work that I needed doing? So that's what you need to think about. So when you got a task coming up, so for example, had this task come up that was, I need to write this case study. So how would I explain to an AI assistant that they need to write that case study? Well, they don't have the same information as I do. So I would tell an assistant to interview me. I would tell them, this is the output. This is, you need to interview me to get to that
yeah,
output. So that's the secret, is to think about what you would tell somebody in order to get that information from you.
yeah.
And
Love
prompt
it.
engineering is really important as well. But actually, if you can get it to ask you clarifying questions, then you can limit the risk of your prompt by saying, please clarify this. And it will then help you to give more context to that. So they're two tips that I would definitely take away to help you to become more AI first. Is there anything, before we wrap up, is there anything you would suggest, Nick?
The things that I have suggested, really, I think the going at it first, thinking about using it
Yeah,
first, and trying to smooth that interaction. If you're just using ChatGPT in a browser, maybe try installing the app because that gives you another level of
yeah,
just access. And on my Mac, it's there at your fingertips, ready to go. Maybe next time we should
yeah,
talk a bit about prompt engineering because that is really important. I think it's the first way of
yeah, I agree.
taking people up a level from just typing in a sentence or something, isn't it? That
Yeah, I
yeah,
agree.
nice one. All
Cool.
right, speak to you next time.
Yeah. Speak to you next
Thanks,
time.
mate. Bye now.